or we can start talking about what we're gonna do today. So basically, what we're gonna do today is we're gonna build um, the starter code for Mini Project 3A. So this morning I was thinking, okay, what are we gonna do for a demo? We already have a starter code for Mini Project 3, so why don't we just like use that and then build that starter code? It's actually a good idea. But anyway, in the starter code, you'll find a couple of things. You'll have two folder that says feeds and auth. In MP3A, you'll focus on building the authentication and the feed, and on 3B, you'll focus on building the detail of the feeds and then the create new events view. So that's sort of how we're going to separate. And more importantly, in 3A, we are introducing a framework, or not a framework, like a library called Firebase. It's a service provided by Google, and through that you'll have access to something like a database, authentication, and cloud media storage. In this video, not in this video. In this Hackshop, we'll basically be covering the authentication, specifically sign in, and use it. And in the project, you will use it as an example and build a sign up and data retrieval, stuff like that. But before that, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what Firebase, like the actual database structure, looks like. How many of you guys have heard of or used Firebase before? Let's see, one hands up. Nice. So basically, many of you guys probably taken 61A. You already know SQL, stands for Standard Query Language. Firebase is known as a non-SQL language. It's a non-SQL database. And it's that because in the Firebase, data is not organized as like tables and rows and columns, stuff like that. In Firebase particular, it's organized in what we call collections. So here in the Firebase that you guys will be using, we have two collections. The first is event, and the second is user. The collections will sort of be a place where all of the documents, which is like a data frame, will live. So events will have a collections of the events data frame, and the user will have a bunch of user data frame. And the data frame, we call that documents. So these are the documents, and these are the collections. And within each document, you have fields. This is where the key value pair where your data is going to be. So for example, in user, we have email, we have the name, we have the save events, which is the UID that's going to link to the events collection in the events documents. And we also have usernames. So this is basically going to be the backend structure of the database, and we'll build an iOS app that's going to interface with the database. So in the MDB social, if you guys run git pull starter main, you'll have the MDB social starter code. That's going to be the starter code for your Mini Project 3, and you also have Hackshop 3. Hackshop 3 is basically a no starter version of MP3, and we'll sort of be using that as a starter for this Hackshop. But for the project, you'll want to use the MDB social folder, because that has all of the starter code. But first, let's run our app and take a look at the signing.
Are you recording, Michael?
Yes, I'm recording on my laptop. It's not like the Zoom recording, because Zoom recording, the resolution kind of sucks. Yeah. So the first time you build the app, whether it's starter code or or a non-starter code version, because you have to build the entire Firebase library, it's probably gonna take a while. On my laptop, it took about 2 minutes or something like that, and mine is like mid 17 Mbp. So it might take longer, but just wait for a little bit, and it will eventually run. So here's the UI that we'll be working with as for the sign in. You have the email, you have the password, you have the sign in button that doesn't do anything right now, and of course you have the sign up button that will take you to the sign up page. What we're gonna do is we're gonna customize the did tap sign in button, the did tap sign in callback, and use the sign go back to call a function within the auth provider. The reason why we have an auth provider is because of MVC, right? Because we don't want to have everything just cramped up in a view controller. We want to have this separated data or separated model that handles all of the Firebase authentication requests and the Firebase database requests. In the auth provider, we will basically make a sign-in function, a single sign-in function that will, will sign in with a email and the password. To begin with, we're gonna create this function. So we're just saying func sign in, and then we want to take a moment to think about, what parameters we need to sign in a user. So it could be helpful to take a look at the API that Firebase gave us. It's going to be in the auth object. We have created the auth object along with a Firebase auth provider. So here we can just use the auth object to invoke the sign in API. And here we have a couple of APIs, related to different sign in methods. But the one we're going to use is the with email password completion API. So you see, to sign in, we need an email, we need a password, we need a completion. And we could just start with, making an email and the password. We'll worry about completion a little bit later. So email, password. Password is a string, just like that. And then we can pass our email to the API and pass our password to the API. And then completion, take a look at what the completion, the expecting type of the completion. It's going to be an auth data request error. So the information we get from this is that it has two positional arguments. The first is the data request results, and then the second one is error. So for completion, we can use a trailing closure syntax. If you don't know what that is, it's basically if you have a completion, if you have a closure that's at the end of the argument list, and you could basically, just ignore the label, the argument label, and then use a trailing closure syntax, just write it at the very end. So here we're expecting two positional arguments, the auth, that we call it auth results, and error. So we talk about handling error a little bit more in depth in the video that just got released. But basically the basics are, you want to check whether error is nil, because this error, if there is something wrong with the request, this error will comes in as a non-nil object, and you want to catch that and terminate it, because there's no point of going forward if there is an error. So we're gonna say if that error equal error, we want to print that error, or in our case, we want to do something more specific than an error, because think about the sign-in scenario, right? There could be a lot of things that goes wrong, and you want to be able to categorize it in some way, whether it's a wrong password or user not found, or is it like invalid email, or is a network timeout. You want to be able to classify that and provide it back to the user. So we're first gonna assign this error to a non-nil object if that exists, and then we're actually gonna go back to the top of our class, and we're gonna create the error enum. So here it could get a little bit confusing why we're creating an enum, but basically you just think about, an error is a finite list of possible types of error. And so using an enum, we can avoid, just passing a generic string. so that in the downstream, when we're assigning it, calling it to with a using our completion, we'll be able to differentiate the behavior of that completion using a enum. But for now, it will make more sense after a while. But for now, let's just like write some cases for our sign-in error. For example, wrong password, a user not found, and well, of course we'll have more, but let's just stick to two cases, bro. And here we have our error, and then we want to typecast it to NS error. Here, this is just kind of like a Swift boilerplate because the error type doesn't have what we need, like the error code inside. We need to cast it as an NS error in order to get the error code. So here we have the error code. Is gonna be Firebase auth error code, and we will initialize it using a raw value inside our NS error. So here we have an object of Firebase auth error code, NS error.code, error code, and we'll use a switch statement to check what kind of error it is. So we'll say error code, and in the pattern, we'll find like a bunch of patterns inside associated with the auth error code. And here, this is where we're gonna need that completion, because we not only want to be able to sign in a user, we also want to be able to handle the result of that sign in. And in previous lessons, we talked about how we can use a completion to add an after effect to an asynchronous function call, and this is where we're gonna use that completion. Here we will add another parameter, set completion, and then this completion is gonna be a result. It's gonna take in a result. Here, results is a Swift built-in type, which it's a Swift built-in enum type that has two cases. The first case is a success, and the second case is a failure. And with each of the enum case, it comes with what's known as an associated value. And when you declare the results, you'll be able to declare what the associated value is. And in this case, we will have a user class associated with the success case, and we will have a sign-in error class that we just defined up here associated with the failure case. So here, imagine how this thing is gonna work, right? We have a result that has an associated value, and every time we call the completion, we'll be able to pass in the results and put it and have and then assign an object associated with that results, right? And when it's a success, it will be a user. When it's a failure, it will be a sign-in error. So here we have the results. Take in this. We have the closure. The case takes in the result and returns a void. Here we will make it an optional. Notice that if it is an optional, we don't have to call it escaping, because an optional closure is automatically escaping. We'll talk about escaping in the in lesson 3 that just got released for this week. So basically, escaping closure allows you to use closure outside of the function scope, because the sign in happens outside the function scope. It has to escape from that function. That's basically like the gist of it. So here, let's see how this is gonna work. Wrong password, that means our completion must pass in a failure. We want to unwrap the completion and then say a failure. And then the sign-in error is going to be a wrong password sign-in error. So this will trickle down to the passer, to the caller of the sign-in function, and it will handle it from there. Because this is a model. Model shouldn't handle view-specific behaviors. Model should only handles the interaction with the data, and then like it will be the view controller's jobs to handle the results of that data on the specific views, right? So here we're just gonna pass in the completion, and then for all of the other case, let's just say completion and failure, user not found. Of course, like this is not what the logic's gonna look like. It's just like a demonstration of how to handle that error. So after we get this out of the way, we can assume that we don't have an error. Actually, we cannot quite yet assume that we don't have an error. We can just like assume that we don't have like this the error that defined in the auth error code. But sometimes there could be like I actually don't know like what could be the case for, like these doesn't return a valid object. But if there is no error, that generally means you're fine, but we still need to unwrap the auth results. Because sometimes, I don't know, sometimes it may get a nil, despite that the error is not, it is already a nil. So here we're just gonna say completion. Let's make an internal error case. So this here we have a completion, and then it's a failure again, and it's an internal error, and we want to return, and we also want to return here. Next, we will have to link the sign in, the user returned by the sign in to our current user class. So if we take a look at if they take a look at a user class, we see that it has a couple of variables that the user class is provided to you. You can just use it out of the box. But basically, it has a user ID, has a username, email, full name, save events. So the problem is Firebase authentication only returns a user ID and the email. Username, user full name, and saved events, they are documents in, if you recall, Cloud Firestore. These two are two different things. So what we're going to do is after the authentication return as an authentication object, we will take the UUID out of the authentication object, which is a valid user UID, and use that to link our user to the Cloud Firestore documents object. So here we'll have to create another function called link user that's gonna take in a UUID from Firebase authentication and link it with the current user right here. So here we will say with UID. Here we made an alias, UID, user ID, which is basically a string. It makes our code more explicit. With UID, and then we also gonna need a completion, right? Because we still want to pass this completion into the link user so that when we finally linked our user, it will eventually be able to say complete with success. Because link user is also an asynchronous process. Here we will say completion, and we'll do the same thing. Results with user, and when it's a failure, when associated with a sign-in error. I've lose track how many parentheses I add. It should be like this, and then optional with a default value of nil. Here we will add our user to link the user to a listener. The important thing of making a listener instead of a one-time retrieval is that when we update our database, we want to be able to simultaneously update the user inside this link user. So this is like a whole idea of link user instead of like get user or something like this, because we have because one of the benefits of Firebase is that it's a real-time database, and for real-time database, when there's something change in the data that we're observing, that the app is observing, the apps will get notified with the newer updates. So here, this is what we're gonna use. We're gonna create a user listener, so that in the future we'll be able to cancel it if needed. Listener, like that. I think the type. Actually, I don't remember the type of that. It's called listener registration. And here we will initialize this listener user listener with our database collection snapshot listener. So collection here, collection will say collection path. The collection path is users. Is there anything wrong? I don't have autocomplete. Do I have DB? Yes, I do. Oh yeah, it's just because of the type. And then document. We want to have the document ID. So if we take a look at our database, the document ID is just the user ID from Firebase authentication object. So here we'll say document ID equal to UID. And finally, we're going to add a snapshot listener, just like that. And this snapshot listener, just like a authentication object, authentication sign-in method API, it comes with a closure. For this one, we will say doc snapshot. The first positional argument is the documentation snapshot. Doc snapshot, and the second one is error. Well, if you don't remember like the types of the positional argument, you can just write something random, and then here if you write it, like it will actually prompt you, what's the type of that positional argument. So you don't have to remember, like the first thing is snapshot and the second thing is error, because you can actually see it after you initialize it. Here we're gonna do pull the same trick, like assign, check whether there's an error, and assign it and unwrap the document. But for this demonstration, we could just like assume that nothing goes wrong, and then our snapshots gets unwrapped to a document. Guard let document doc snapshot, else let's just say an internal error, completion dot failure dot internal error, and we also return. Now the documentation snapshot is going to include our user class, include the user document, the user object, but we still have to decode it as the Swift internal user class. And the syntax we're gonna use is the document data syntax. This will be the syntax that you'll be using for basically all of the database requests. So here we have the documents, and then we're gonna say data as a, you see it's expecting a decodable protocol, and our user class is already decoded. It's already codable, and it being codable means that it's decodable plus it's encodable. So it basically includes the protocol requirement, the decodable protocol requirement. So where is it? So we're gonna say as user dot self, and else, again, this might be something that you want to handle, like in another error case. For example, like if there is something wrong with the Firebase data structure, this will returns an error. So usually you'll want something like Firebase read error, just to be able to differentiate that in your view controller. So here we'll just say completion failure internal error, and also return. Right. So here we have our user as a user class. So we can actually assign it to our current user object, just like that. And then finally, we can call completion with a success, right? And then success, because it's expecting a user, we could just pass it in. So this is going to be an entire workflow of this asynchronous request. We first call sign in with an email password, and also completion. The completion is taking a result. Result has two cases. If it's a failure, it will have an associated value with a sign in error. If it's a success, it will have an associated value of a user. So here, let's see if there is. Yeah, here we still have to call the link user function. So self.link user with UID, and completion is the completion, right? So let's see. If sometimes Xcode is really slow when I'm screen recording. Cannot find UID in scope. Oh wait, yeah. So we still have to grab that from our auth results. Look at user.uid. Here auth result.user is different from our built-in user class. Auth result.user is the Firebase user class. Just keep that in mind, but the UID is all the same. So we have our sign-in object, and the next step is sort of to call it with our view controller in the did tab sign in. I'm just gonna do a quick example, see and show you what this might look like in our view controller. So first we're gonna unwrap the email. Gardlet email equal email text field dot text, and also we're gonna check email is not an empty string. If it's not, we'll show an error banner with a title, missing email, and then the subtitle, please provide an email. So here is a way of handling the error. You display that to the user with an error banner. So error banner, this is a third-party library that shows a little. Actually, can I show you? Actually, never mind. We're kind of running out of time. But basically, if you run your starter code from MP3, if you do something wrong, it will prop up like an in-app notification, using this function. So this is just an example of how we can handle error like that. Also return, and we want to do the same thing for the password. Password equals to password text field dot text, and we also want to make sure that the password is not a empty string, and then else, I would just leave this blank. But you guys know that you need to do something for the error. So here's the important part. We're going to call our Firebase auth provider sign in API, the API that we just made, using a custom completion along with the email and password that we grab from the UI. Here, completion, for the completion, we're going to use the trailing closure syntax because it's cleaner. And we'll first switch the results. So it's expecting a result. So this result will be the result type that we defined in our API. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to switch this result and with two cases. So if we recall, like it has a success case and it has a failure case, right? And after the success case, after the syntax, here you will have the opportunity to bind the associated value to a local variable. Here we're going to bind it to the user local variable, and for the second one, we're going to bind it to a error variable. And inside this inside this error failure, we can add our error handling, right? We can switch the error again, and we can see all of the error cases that we just defined. So for example, if it's a user not found, we can like show an error banner like this, oops, and we say like user not found, just like that. And let's see, for the default, we could just do something. So basically here is where you will handle all of the error cases with a switch, like or it's an internal error or wrong password. You get the idea. Just like that. I'll just copy and paste. Can I infer contextual base, infer member result. What's going on? Yeah, I have to call it. I have to do explicitly, call self explicitly. we'll talk about reference cycle a little bit later. So here, this is the error, and then next we have the success case. For the success case, we will just take us. We will just have it take us to the feed screen. So to do that, it's a little bit complicated. It's just you have to grab the window from UI application.shared, and then you want to filter that window because after iOS 12 or something, like an iPad can have multiple windows, so like it has to be controlled with a scene delegate. But basically, we want to filter all of the windows and see which window is the key window. You don't have to note this. It's just like kind of annoying iOS stuff. So is key window, and then grab the first. It's a Gartlet. Return, just like that, and then we have our window. And if you recall from the scene delegate, we can assign the root view controller of that window to the VC that I forgot to create. UI storyboard. What's the storyboard name? I don't remember. I think it's main. Main bundle is nil, and initialize the instantiate the initial view controller like that. Basically, this will grab the initial view controller of the UI storyboard. If you guys are not using storyboard, you could just like call the initializer of that view controller and assign that VC to the root view controller of that window. And we're also gonna add a little bit transition. Actually, it's fine. Never mind. We could just say window make key invisible. This will switch it to that window. Here we have our results. Let's see if there's anything wrong with it. And yeah, another thing that we're gonna add is the loading indicator of our sign in button. So we're just gonna say sign in button dot show loading. This will show the little activity indicator, when a view is loading. And then here we're gonna use a defer and end the sign in hide loading like that. We still have to call self explicitly, just like that. A little bit about defer. Defer is the code that will get run when before a function return. So basically, if you see a return, just plug that defer in. Just imagine that it's run right before it. So this is called like it's in a technical term it's like a code block that's get run before the transfer of control. But before that, we still have to make a weak self to avoid late deallocation. So here, before we do anything, we will have to guard let self equals self and else return. Return. So we talked a little bit more in depth about weak self again in the lesson that was just released. Here the user is never used. It's fine. Like we don't have to use it. If you don't use it, you can just assign it like this. So right now it should run without an error, but let me just show you like what a completed version will look like, because we're still missing some details, and I think like there could be, I don't know. But anyway, let me just run the completed version to see and show you what it should look like. Build succeeded. Wait for it a little bit. Okay. So for example, to test our error handling, if we don't have an email right here and we click sign in, it will show you a missing email. Please provide an email. If you have an email but you don't have a password, it will show missing password. This is from the completed version, and please provide a password. And it has some built-in error handling functionality, but basically if we log in with a testing account, I linked that in the project. Password 96. We'll be able to go to the next screen with this big button that will take us back and sign out. So this is the starter code. You'll be building the sign up page, but with the exact same method. Handle the error, design the API, and do the necessary data retrieval and transition, and then throw it all back to a view controller. Are there any questions?
I have like a really quick question.
Yeah.
Just like can you go back to the auth provider for a second?
Yes.
So I'm just like a bit confused as to how you're able to switch error code with the enum that we created. Like, how is error code a type of that enum? Like, why are those? I don't see where, like, why we're allowed to do that exactly.
Yeah. So here actually this is actually it's like a bit of a problem with my naming practice. This is not like quite an error code. It's more of an error object, because an error code is encapsulated in nserror.code. And here what we're doing is that we're initializing an error code object with a raw value of that error code. The error code is an integer type, and Firebase auth error code object is an enum object. It just happens that it's associated. It's like it has a raw value of an integer, so that when we have an integer of an error code, for example 404, we can use that error code to initialize the enum, because we can't really switch. We can't like efficiently switch an integer. We can only efficiently switch an enum.
Right, but like no, I get that. I just mean like when we switch like the wrong password, we have like wrong password. Like we define that above as like assigned in errors enum. But like that variable that you like the error code variable, like how is that like compliant with the enum above? Like how come we can switch it with that? Like if we didn't, where do we set that to be that enum to be like a member? You know what I mean? Like I just don't understand why we can like switch it with that enum that we created.
I think so. Basically, this is like a mapping. So this error code, this Firebase auth error object, it has like a tons of built-in errors. You could just like pick from. It's like something that comes with a Firebase, but
so it's not related to what we created.
No, it's not related to what we created on top. And what we're doing is just like we're mapping it to what we've created, because sometimes we don't want to deal with like all of the like the built-in error type with Firebase.